Hey everyone, my name is Daniel, an indie game dev working on a shoot 'em up roguelike game called Restore. In all games I've made so far, I created the art by myself. But how can you achieve good looking game art without the skill to draw? And that's exactly the topic of today's video. To make things even easier, let's keep everything clean and simple by using squares only. Of course you can use other shapes as well, but in my opinion the square is the most flexible and beginner friendly of them all. Before we start creating art with squares, we first need some piece of software. I personally use Adobe Photoshop, but you can use any other tool. Besides this, I just use a simple mouse to make the following artwork. No drawing tablet. But with no more words, let's begin making art using squares only. The first very important concept here is that you lean into the restriction to make it a style. That's why I used some sort of rectangle or square everywhere in this artwork. On the other hand, I started the background with one color and then just randomly drew on it with different red tones. As long as these colors have kind of the same saturation and you're good to go. I mainly just changed the brightness of the main color. After I had enough variation in the background, I went to Filter, Pixelate and then Mosaic. This easily gives the background this square look, which helps us to lean into the restriction. In case you don't have the option of using a pixelate filter, maybe try to find a workaround or just fill the background randomly with squares that are all slightly varied in color. Anyway, to create the illusion of depth, I blurred the background a little. When creating art without much skill, blurring is definitely your best friend because it can hide details and make things look more professional because of the illusion of depth. Back to the artwork, I now created the foreground out of 3 simple rectangles. At this moment it's just pure black, but I will change its color later after creating a few background layers. And that was the next step. I first selected an area with the rectangle tool, picked a close color in the background, made this one a bit darker and filled the selection with it. After this I just repeated the same process 2 times, but instead of selecting a color in the background, I selected the one of the layer behind. As soon as I finished making these 3 background layers, I also made a 4th one, but this was a lot more detailed and complex because it should represent some kind of bushes. Finally then I changed the foreground color to be a little brighter and I made some bushes in the foreground in black. In this whole section now, I used another concept to create the illusion of depth and fog. This was making things get darker the closer they are. To make it look even more like there's some fog, I faded the background elements out by just a tiny bit. Next I began shading and adding highlights. To shade, I first selected an intersection of the bushes, filled it with a darker shade and then blurred that. Highlighting was even easier because I just selected the empty space above the bushes and filled the clipping mask layer with white. After this I set the layer type to overlay, deselect and then blurred. The same went for the ground layer, but I just did the shadow a little different than before. Furthermore, I made the 2 foreground layers get a little more purple for subtle variation in color. Lastly, in terms of lighting, I just added highlights to every background layer as well, keeping in mind the intensity is higher the closer the layer is. As soon as I did all of that, I also created some simple clouds out of a few rectangles merged together. Here I experimented a little on which color they should have, but eventually I came up with these clouds. To really make this artwork look really good in terms of color and atmosphere, I now created a simple gradient going from red to blue. I simply set the layer type to color to make this a really good looking color overlay. One of the last details I wanted to add is some texture, and to make it fit that style, I just stamped around the soft round brush and then I used the same pixelate filter as before and blurred the layers far away to create depth, as I did with the sky background at the beginning. I also created that texture to overlay everything later after I added some sun shafts out of blurred and faded out rectangles where the layer type was set to overlay. And finally, to wrap things up, I used the camera raw filter to make everything look just a tad better. This camera raw filter is just the same thing as post-processing in some game engines. And with that, you made a beautiful looking artwork only out of squares. For me, it took around 30 minutes due to its simplicity. I hope some of the techniques, or in the best case, all of the techniques shown in this video, help you to make better art. And as said, nearly everyone can try this out because you don't need much to do so. Just a way of controlling a mouse cursor, a simple piece of software like GIMP or Krita, and a laptop or PC that can run it. If you enjoyed this video, I'd appreciate it so much if you liked and subscribed, and I also got a Discord server filled with really nice people. The link to that is in the description. See you next time. Cheers.